Hannah's POV. I sat at my computer in my room, replaying the conversation I had with my father a few hours prior. He was telling me that if I wanted to have visiting rights to my brother, I had to quit my job. He didn't want me working at this hospital anymore. I didn't want to make that deal with him, but I felt like I had no other choice. I was thankful when I got home, and Sebastian hadn't returned yet. I didn't want to tell him about the deal I just made with my father yet. I wasn't sure how to tell him. All my hard work was going to be for nothing. I felt a painful tug in my chest, and all I wanted to do was cry, but I needed to be strong. Crying wasn't going to solve my issues. Nora kept reminding me how strong we were, and that this wasn't going to bring us down. As I sat at my desk, I pulled out the pamphlet on the Blue Moon Medical Academy. Technically, if I quit my job at the hospital and attended this school, I would still be able to continue as a doctor and fulfill my destiny as a healer, along with furthering my education. It just wouldn't be at the King's Hospital. My father didn't need to know about this, and I would technically be quitting my job at the King's Hospital, just as he wanted. I could return home periodically to visit my brother and make sure he has everything he needs. Then, once I'm an established doctor and at a new hospital permanently, I can transfer my brother to that hospital and away from our father. This could be the only way I could protect him. But would Sebastian allow me to do this? We should talk to him about it first, Nora suggested as I went back and forth through my inner dialogue. And if he says no, I asked. He won't say no if he knows this is the only way to protect your brother, she answered. He won't be able to get Liam out of the hospital a second time because this was technically Liam's choice. Nora was right. Liam was the one who willingly took me off the visitors list, which means he's the only one who can put me back on. Even if Sebastian was the Alpha King, he still had to respect Liam's wishes. I worried about what my father and Amy had said to him to get him to take me off the list in the first place. I shook the thought out of my head and logged into my computer, bringing up the website of the school. I went into the enrollment section of the website and started filling it out. My fingers trembled as I typed my information. I couldn't sense Sebastian anywhere near the palace, so I knew I had some time to finish enrolling. I hated that I had to lie to him again, but I was planning on telling him everything later. I just needed a little bit more time to figure out how to bring it up to him without angering him. He will understand when you tell him the truth, Nora told me, trying to keep her voice gentle. I just hoped she was right. Once I finished enrolling in the school, I typed out my resignation letter for Dr. Davis. It was going to break his heart that I was leaving the practice, but I made a note to tell him that I was going to study at the Blue Moon Medical Academy. That should ease some of the tension. I reread my letter carefully and made some edits before printing it. I hoped I was doing the right thing. I went to the hospital the next morning. I still didn't bring up to Sebastian anything that was going on, but I knew he could sense something was wrong. He didn't ask about it, though. He went straight to Emily's room to care for her as I went to find Dr. Davis. As predicted, Dr. Davis wasn't happy with my letter. I don't understand, he said as he reread my letter for the third time. I thought things were going well here. I thought you enjoyed working here. I do, I told him, staring down at my feet. It's just something I have to do. After a pause, I added, but I enrolled for that school, so I'm still going to continue my career. I was hoping once you were done with the school, you'd return to this hospital and use everything you've learned, he admitted. I guess not. I'm sorry, I told him softly. It has nothing to do with you or anything, but my father is keeping Liam from me once again. He said the only way for me to see him would be to quit my job. I wasn't going to tell him the entire truth, but there was something in Dr. Davis's eyes that compelled me to do so. I didn't like seeing his hurt expression. He looked surprised at my words. Seriously? He asked. Let me talk to your father or even Liam and see if I can get that reversed. No, it's okay, I said quickly. I don't want my father to know that I'm going to this program. I'm hoping once I get a new job at a new hospital, I can transfer Liam there and keep him away from our father. Dr. Davis sighed in defeat, but he nodded as he understood. I'm sad to see you go, Hannah, he breathed. I tried to give him a strong smile, but I knew it wasn't going to reach my eyes. "You are the most promising intern we've ever had. I appreciate all you've done for me," I told him gently. "Thank you so much." He looked like he wanted to hug me, but with Sebastian being so close to us in the hospital, we both knew that would end badly. So we shook hands, and he bowed his head. "I wish you all the best," he said to me before we parted ways. I took in a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves and Nora at the same time. I couldn't keep this from Sebastian any longer. He would notice as soon as I left the hospital, and considering I was supposed to be here and working all day, it would raise suspicion. I had to tell him everything that was going on before I left to go home. I neared Emily's room, my heart beating heavily in my chest. I wasn't planning on going inside of her room, remembering how she reacted when I was around her the other day. But I needed Sebastian to come out so we could talk in the hallway. I was glad Nancy wasn't anywhere near the door to stop me. I pressed my fingers against the door and opened it slightly. As I saw Sebastian, my heart stopped in my chest, nearly shattering. I couldn't believe what my eyes were seeing. Emily was lying flat on her back with her eyes closed, and Sebastian was leaning over her. His lips were pressed firmly against hers. Sebastian's POV. "I'm scared for these next results," Emily said, peering over at Sebastian, who remained in his seat by her bed. "I've been feeling off lately. Lightheaded, nausea, things like that." "I'm sure it's nothing to worry about," he said, keeping his voice monotone. "They will figure something out if it is serious." "What if it's bad?" she asked, nervousness in her tone. "You already have the fate of death knocking on your door," Sebastian reminded her. "Can't be worse than that." She leaned back in her bed. His words were meant to make her feel a bit better about her test results, but he realized his tone was a bit harsher than he meant it. He didn't say anything else, though. He leaned back in his own seat and stared over at the clock. There was a part of him that kind of wanted to find Hannah and see how she was doing. She's been acting weird for the last few days, and he couldn't figure out what was wrong. He knew if he asked her, she would probably lie to him about it, as she often did. He couldn't understand why Hannah was all of a sudden lying to him. He couldn't help but wonder to himself if she was planning on leaving him to attend that school. That was the only logical explanation as to why she wouldn't bring something as important as that up to him. They never actually finished their conversation about the subject since she walked out on him and came to the hospital. He made a mental note for later to speak to her more about it. "I'm having," Emily breathed, her eyes closed, and she was holding on to her chest. "Trouble breathing." She finished her sentence in a breath as her breathing ceased. Sebastian shot to his feet, trying not to panic, as he pressed the button that paged Nancy. He waited a moment for her to appear, but there was no sensing her in the immediate area. He pressed the button again before he decided to take action of his own. If he didn't do something quickly, Emily could possibly die right then and there. He removed the pillow from behind her head so she would lay flat on her back. He lifted her chin with his fingers to try to get a steady airflow. He pressed his ear against her mouth to try to get a sense of her breath, but he didn't hear or feel anything. He grabbed her wrist to feel for a pulse. Thankfully, she had a faint pulse. He then pressed his ear against her chest to listen for her heartbeat before pressing the button for Nancy again and again. He waited a moment longer, but when Nancy failed to show up, he pressed his lips against Emily's and tried to blow as much air into her lungs as he could. Just as he began blowing air into her, the door swung open and all his senses were enlightened. Eric grew tense as Hannah's scent filled the room. "What the hell?" she breathed as Sebastian pulled away to look at her. Her eyes were wide and alert, with tears instantly filling them. Her features were bright red, and she looked like she was about to run away at any moment. Emily sat up and looked over at Hannah. There was an expression on her face that Sebastian couldn't read, but he felt his blood boiling. She was acting like she wasn't just passed out completely. "I turn my back and then you start kissing her?" Hannah asked, tears falling from her eyes. Before Sebastian could say anything or Emily could make a fit that Hannah was in her room, Nancy came running to the room. Sebastian pulled his gaze away from Hannah to address Nancy, who was checking Emily's heartbeat. She stopped breathing, Sebastian told her. I applied mouth to mouth to get her breathing again. He felt Hannah's tension simmering down slightly, but he didn't look at her. He focused his attention on Nancy and Emily. Once Nancy finished checking Emily, she turned to Sebastian. Thank you for helping her, Nancy said to him. If you wouldn't mind, I'd like to speak with you in the hallway. He nodded and started following her out of the door. Hannah kept her eyes steadily on him. They made brief eye contact before he left the room. Hannah's POV. I felt like I couldn't breathe when I saw Sebastian's lips against Emily's, but I felt humiliated and stupid once he explained to Nancy what had happened. Had Emily actually stopped breathing? The look on her face made me think she was making the entire thing up, and she did that to get Sebastian to kiss her. Nora was fueled with anger, and I was frozen in my spot. Nancy pulled Sebastian out of the room to speak to him. I couldn't believe she actually left me alone in the room with Emily. Emily stared at me for a long while as I tried to process my thoughts. My eyes met hers, and I could see the humor dancing around her face. I was getting a terrible feeling in the pit of my stomach. I'm glad you're here, Emily said, her voice sending a chill down my spine. You are? I asked, disbelief lingering in my tone. Sure, she said as she adjusted her pillow and leaned back into her bed. I've been wanting to talk to you for a while. She's up to something. I can feel it, Nora breathed. I took a step closer to her and took in a deep breath to calm my wolf. The other day you kicked me out of your room, I reminded her, furrowing my eyebrows together. You didn't seem like you wanted to talk to me. She frowned and nodded. That's because I had just gotten some news and I needed to speak to Sebastian about it alone, she told me. The knot in my stomach tightened. Sebastian hadn't mentioned anything about this. It was weird how he wouldn't bring it up, but maybe it wasn't anything major. However, the pit in my stomach doubted that very much. Don't be too hard on him, Emily said, reading my face. He does the best he can. I pressed my lips firmly together to make a thin line as I stared around her features. I know that, I said through a tightened jaw. I was trying hard not to lose control because Nora was ready to rip her throat out. Of course, you know, she chuckled. You are his Luna for right now. I stared at her blankly for a moment, a little bit taken aback by her wording. What did she mean by I'm his Luna for right now? Pretty soon it won't be you on the throne beside him, she clarified, her eyes darkening slightly. It'll be me, just as it should have been from the beginning. Excuse me? I asked, staring around her face in disbelief. I got my test results the other day, she explained. I thought he would have told you about the news by now, but I guess he's leaving it to me to break it to you. However, it turns out I'm pregnant with Sebastian's baby. What? I breathed. And just like that, everything turned black. Hannah's POV. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, Emily said, a smile playing on her lips, and there was no ounce of compassion on her expression. She isn't sorry, Nora hissed. Nothing about her is sorry. I clenched my fingers tightly, feeling my nails pressing firmly in the palms of my hands. It was taking everything I had not to lung at her and rip her apart, piece by piece. We've been seeing each other for some time now. He was supposed to tell you, but I couldn't wait for him to do that much longer. I appreciate your honesty, I said through my tightened jaw. I had to get out of there before something happened. I could feel tears burning in the back of my eyes, and I was already humiliated standing in her presence. I could sense Sebastian returning to the room. He was only around the corner. If I left now, he wouldn't see me. I needed to get out of there quickly. I turned away from Emily before she could say anything more, and I ran from the room. I heard the murmurs of Nancy and Sebastian from not far away, and I knew I had seconds before they spotted me. I felt Nora shifting without my control. I gasped as her fur broke through my skin, and her powers began raining through me. Her fury was intense, but her pain was even more evident. She didn't want to fight or attack anyone at that moment. She just wanted to leave the hospital and not look back. She howled out in distress. Her pain was clear in her tone, and it sounded through the hospital halls. Sebastian silenced, and I could sense his concern. He knew it was me right away, and it was only a matter of time before he ran toward me. Nora ran quickly. I could hardly grasp what was happening. One moment we were in the halls of the hospital, and the next we were surrounded by the wooded forest. I felt the wind whipping through our fur and strengthening our body. I breathed deeply, trying to calm her, but her pain was too much to handle. She didn't want to hunt. She didn't want to fight. She just wanted to get away. I allowed her to run for as long as it took. We ran circles around the large forest, running with a speed that made my vision blurry. My heart raced rapidly against my chest, feeling like it was about to explode. Tears threatened to escape from my eyes, but I pushed the feeling away and focused on Nora, trying to calm her to get her to slow down and rest for a little while. She ignored most animals that we passed, refusing to feed. Her body trembled as she howled again, her tone cracking slightly as pain overcame her. She was becoming the pain she was feeling. It was an odd reaction to have, considering we didn't even want to marry the Wolf King to begin with. This whole marriage was set up by my father, so his family would be set up for life with the king's money and fortune. This was never about me, and all about my father and his family. This wasn't fair to me, and now Nora was suffering because of it. I wasn't sure at what point I began having actual feelings for Sebastian, but it was obvious that Nora was feeling for him hard. Ever since he chose us as his mate and then didn't mark us, she's been only wanting to be close to him and have him by her side. Our scent and saliva kept him calm during his madness, but in return, he also kept Nora calm. She enjoyed his presence, and we were getting used to being his Luna Queen. Now everything was crashing down around us before we could grasp what was happening. He was no longer the wolf Nora was beginning to love. He was a stranger with a baby on the way. I wasn't sure how much more pain I could handle. My lungs felt like they were being squeezed as I tried to control my breathing. It didn't help that Nora was running at a fast pace. She could feel my distress, and soon she started to slow. A sob escaped my mind, and I listened to her weeping for a long while. As we sat, I allowed the tears to flow from my eyes. Nora allowed me to transition back into my person so I could sob freely. My body trembled, and I suddenly felt so alone. I wrapped my arms around my body, trying to hold it still and keep from trembling too violently. "We should go to the palace," Nora said weakly. She was dreading seeing our Wolf King again, but we couldn't avoid him forever. The sun was setting in the distance, which meant we'd been in the forest for a while. Sebastian was bound to start searching soon if we didn't return. "What are we going to do?" I asked her. She was silent for a moment as we walked slowly. My feet were bare and crushing the dirt and twigs that surrounded us. I didn't mind the pain that it caused the bottoms of my feet. There was no pain greater than what Nora was experiencing. It broke my heart to feel her in such discomfort and agony. "We go to bed," she answered. "We need rest. Tomorrow we will figure out what to do, but for right now, we rest." I said nothing more to her, and she said nothing more in return. The palace came into view and a lump formed in my throat. I tried to swallow it down, but it felt stuck. The aura around the castle was almost darkened. I didn't need to enter to know that Sebastian was there and waiting for me. He was probably furious that I took off so suddenly. As suspected, he was standing in the middle of the foyer as I entered. He was pacing back and forth, even after he saw that I was there. He paused and stared me over. I probably looked like such a mess. I wasn't even sure what to say to him at that point. I thought he would be a lot angrier, but his expression was almost unreadable. It was typically hard to read his expression because of his mask, but usually there was something in his eyes or the formation of his lips would give away what he was thinking and feeling. But in this case, there was nothing. Soon, his eyes shifted, and I could see the concern in his gaze as he stared at me. I thought he was going to run toward me and hug me. He even took a step closer to me, but I flinched away from him. I didn't want to be embraced by this man. I wanted to leave, but I listened to Nora when she said we needed to rest and figure out what to do tomorrow. We needed to sleep. I could feel exhaustion overtaking my body. "What happened?" he asked. His tone was low and filled with worry. I was surprised by that. "I've been worried. You took off so quickly, in your wolf form. I rose my hand to silence him. He looked startled. "I'm going to bed," I told him in a broken whisper as I walked past him. "Hannah," he said. It wasn't a warning, but a plea for me to stay and talk with him. "Not tonight, Sebastian. Just not tonight." Sebastian's POV. It was a new feeling for Sebastian when he saw how broken Hannah had become. There was a painful sensation in his chest, and Eric was getting a nasty feeling as well. He wasn't sure what happened at the hospital to make her go crazy and take off in her wolf form, but he knew he shouldn't have left her alone with Emily. Nancy pulled him away to discuss some of Emily's test results. It wasn't anything serious, so Sebastian was aggravated for being pulled out of the room when he needed so desperately to speak with Hannah. He understood what she thought she saw when she first entered the room. Sebastian had his lips pressed against Emily's, but he was only giving her mouth to mouth. He was certain Hannah understood that once Nancy got there, but she took off so suddenly he wasn't sure what she was thinking. "Let her go," Eric said as Sebastian was about to take off after her. It wasn't like his wolf to hold him back when it came to Hannah. He knew Eric wanted to go after her just as badly, if not more than Sebastian. Her wolf is in severe pain. She needs to run it off. She will return to us later, and we can talk to her then. Sebastian said nothing. He stood at the doorway of the hospital, staring in the direction Hannah had run. She was long gone at that point. Eric was right, though. Hannah did return to them later that night. He was just about to go after her, but then he sensed her nearby. He waited in the foyer for her to show up, and once she did, that pained feeling in his chest intensified. Her eyes were red from tears, and her features were tear-stained and blotchy. Her hair was a damped mess from sweating, and she was breathing heavily, probably from all the running. Her clothes were ripped from the branches of the forest, and she was barefoot. She held on to her arms tightly, trying to keep herself still as she looked him in the eyes. It was like she wasn't there at all. There was only pain in her expression, and he wanted to wrap his arms around her to calm her. She backed away from him as he approached her, that pain and fear that was once so potently on her face returning to her. It was like she no longer recognized him, and she only saw him as the monster he was. "What happened?" he asked her. "I've been worried. You took off so quickly. In your wolf form, He tried to say, but she rose her hand up to quiet him. "I'm going to bed," she said, her voice sounding raw and unfamiliar. She began walking past him, and it took everything he had to not grab her and stop her. "Hannah," he tried to plead to her, but she wouldn't turn around to face him. She just kept walking toward the stairs. "Not tonight, Sebastian, just not tonight," she said tiredly as she walked up the stairs. He wanted to go to bed with her and hope that she would speak to him in the morning. But there was a furious haze running through his mind. He clenched his fists, and he was beginning to see red through his vision. He was keeping himself calm for as long as he could, but now he feared that Eric couldn't handle it anymore. "What the hell did Emily say to her?" Eric roared. Sebastian ran quickly from the palace. He had one destination in mind, and that was the hospital. He didn't find out at the time of being at the hospital what Emily had said to her, but he was going to find out now. She was startled to see him standing at her doorway. He was breathing heavily, and his jaw was tightened. "Sebastian," she breathed, staring at him with wide and worried eyes. What did you say to her?" Sebastian asked, cutting her off and speaking through his clenched teeth. She gave him a fake innocent look, but he knew it wasn't sincere. He could see it in her eyes. "I'm not playing with you, Emily," he growled. "What did you say to her?" "The truth," she told him. "Something you were too afraid to do." "What the hell are you talking about?" he asked, his voice booming through the room. "What's going on?" He heard the familiar voice of Dr. Davis walking down the hall in his direction. He walked further into Emily's room and slammed the door shut behind him, locking it to keep the asshole doctor away from them. "I'll ask you one more time, Emily," he seethed. "What did you say to her?" "I told her I was pregnant," Emily said, her voice trembling slightly as she realized how furious he truly was. "What?" Sebastian asked. He couldn't have heard her correctly. "I'm pregnant, Sebastian." Hannah's POV. "I woke up the next morning feeling hopeless. My insides felt completely empty, and Nora was silenced. She was experiencing too much heartache to speak. She didn't need to speak to tell me what we needed to do. I was almost relieved that Sebastian wasn't here when I woke up. I wasn't even sure if he came to bed, but telling from his untouched side of the bed, I would assume he didn't. The first thing I did when I woke up was check my emails on my phone, and I nearly dropped my phone when I saw the acceptance letter to my enrollment and my attached schedule. I would have to let them know if I was going to room at the school or be living in a house outside of campus. I also only had a week before I had to go there and get settled in. I wasn't sure I was going to be able to stay here for another week, though. I didn't have it in me to be around Sebastian anymore. At least I woke up receiving good news for once. I wasn't sure I was going to be strong enough for what I had to do next, though. I got dressed and walked to the King's City Town Hall. I didn't have Lewis drive me because I was worried. He would ask me questions about what I was doing. The woman behind the desk at me with such confusion crossing her features when I told her what I needed. I knew she wasn't going to deny me, but she couldn't believe I was actually asking her such a thing. "Are you sure that's what you want?" she asked, staring at me like I had 3 heads. I nodded once. "Yes," I told her. "There's been infidelity in the marriage. I can't be a part of something like that anymore." She looked sad for me, but she didn't argue. She printed the forms and slid them across the table. "Just mail them or drop them off once they are signed by both parties involved." I gave her a weak smile as my thanks and stared at the large and bold letters on the top of the forms that read, "Divorce Agreement." I expressed that I didn't want anything from this marriage, and I wanted everything to go back to the way it was before we married. All he had to do was sign these papers, and he will never have to worry about me again. He can have Emily, and they can raise their baby together. Before I left the office, I grabbed a pen off her desk and signed my part of the divorce papers. Sebastian's POV. Sebastian had been walking through the forest in his wolf form for most of the night. He couldn't bring himself to go back to the palace after his last conversation with Emily. She told him she was pregnant, and she told Hannah it was his baby. He was so speechless that he needed to leave before he killed her and every doctor and nurse in that hospital. He was ready to lose control, but thankfully, he managed to get away to a safe distance and let loose on some stray animals instead. If it was the full moon, though, they wouldn't have been so lucky. The hurt expression Hannah had given him made so much sense now. He felt stupid for allowing her to think such a thing. He didn't believe in infidelity, and besides, Hannah was his chosen mate. He couldn't do anything to deliberately hurt her or her wolf. He needed her to understand that. He needed to speak with her. He watched the sun rising in the distance, and he knew it would only be a matter of time before she woke up. He went back to the palace only to find that she wasn't even there. He was confused because Lewis was still there, but no one seemed to know where she had gone. He had a worried feeling in the pit of his stomach. Eric didn't like her sudden absence, especially after how she looked the night before. Before he could worry too much and go looking for her, he sensed her approaching. He breathed out relief as she came into view. She no longer looked like a mess. She was wearing clean clothing with actual shoes. Her hair was brushed and thrown in a low ponytail. She didn't look like she's been crying, but her face looked hardened and expressionless. It made him worry even more seeing her like this. She stared up at him as she entered the palace. There was something in her eyes that he didn't recognize. It was almost like disgust. "We need to talk," she said. Her voice was oddly calm. He nodded and followed her into the living quarters, away from wandering ears and eyes. It's been a while since he's seen Magnolia, but he knew she was lurking around somewhere. Jack worked as a detective at the police station, so he was always busy working and rarely at the palace, so it wasn't weird to not see Jack around. But Magnolia was usually always around and causing some kind of trouble. He made a mental note to find her later, but right now he needed to focus his attention on Hannah and saving their marriage. "Look, I talked to Emily, and I know what she said," Sebastian tried to say, but her words cut him off. "I want a divorce," she said flatly as she revealed the divorce papers in her hands. His heart stopped in his chest. He stared around her face questionably. She was serious. "What?" he said, his jaw tightening. He could feel Eric's anger rising through him, and he had to take in a deep breath to calm him, knowing that wasn't going to work. "I can't be with you anymore," she said. She was trying hard to keep her words from quivering, but he caught a glimpse of sadness in her eyes. "I'm leaving you." "No," he hissed through his clenched teeth. Over his dead body, was he going to let her leave him like this? Not without a proper conversation. She needed to know the truth about everything. "You got Emily pregnant," she breathed. Weakness started to reveal through her words. "She was lying to you. I never touched her." Sebastian tried to defend himself, but he was starting to see red. He couldn't believe Hannah was actually trying to leave him, and it was all because of Emily's lies. He tightened his fists. He wanted to punch something. "Even if that is true, I'm not competing with her, Sebastian," she said. There was finality in her tone, and he knew it would take a lot to convince her otherwise. "Please, just sign the divorce papers and I'll be on my way." "You have nowhere to go," he growled, narrowing his eyes on her. "I got accepted to Blue Moon Medical Academy. I can dorm there and figure the rest out later," she told him, keeping her eyes rested on his. "No," he hissed again. "Hannah, you are my Luna," he tried to say, but she shook her head, silencing his words. "Not anymore, Sebastian," she said, lifting the papers again. "Just sign them, please. Then you'll never have to worry about me again. I'll leave and you can be with Emily." He hardly heard the rest of what she was saying. Red was overtaking him. He felt Eric escaping through him only for a moment. He wasn't going to allow his chosen mate to leave that easily, and he wasn't going to take no for an answer. Before Sebastian could grasp what was happening, the claws of his wolf were grabbing onto Hannah's arm and tightening their hold. He pulled her near, forcibly. She cried out with fear as the papers fell from her grip and landed on the floor around them. He saw the terror in her eyes and the tears rolling down her flushed cheeks. Her body trembled uncontrollably. But at that moment, he didn't care. He didn't care about anything other than keeping Hannah as his Luna and not letting her go. She said something to him he couldn't hear. His wolf was taking over completely. She screamed at the sight of his large teeth coming near her. He used one hand to pull her hair away from the back of her neck, and the other hand to keep her steadily in place as he bit his teeth into her flesh. She screamed again. This time there was pain behind the scream. Her body pressed against his limply as fell toward the ground. He pulled away from her, allowing her to fall. She wasn't unconscious. She was just in pain and had so much fear going through her. He stumbled back, tasting her blood on his lips. She sobbed and held the area on her neck where he bit. It wouldn't be long before the wound healed, but the gash was large, and her fingers trembled as she attempted to stop the bleeding. "You," she breathed, her words quivering as she sobbed. "You." She could hardly speak. He could feel her fear. "I marked you," he growled. "You are mine. I have chosen you as my mate." "Please," she cried. He took a step towards her, but she flinched away from him almost violently. There were no words left for her to say. There was too much terror in the atmosphere, and all she could do was sob. As he stared around her frail and terrified body, Eric began calming down, leaving Sebastian to feel almost guilty. She was in so much pain, inside and out, and he wasn't being compassionate towards her. She needed him, and now she was terrified to be around him. He breathed in deeply to try to calm himself down. He stared down at his hands and realized he was covered in her blood. "I don't want to be here anymore," she cried. Her words came out like a squeak as she continued to sob. "Please, let me go." He looked down at the divorce papers. He couldn't bring himself to sign them, but he also didn't want to keep her here against her will. What has he done? Eric could sense his hesitation and was angry with him. He felt betrayed by Sebastian, knowing that Sebastian was going to let her go. She's been wanting to attend this school, and he couldn't make her give that opportunity up. "Fine," he finally said, wiping the blood from his mouth with the back of his sleeve. "You can leave, but I'm not signing your papers." He turned and walked away, leaving her to cry on the floor. Hannah's POV. The ground in the living quarters felt cold. Blood dripped from my shoulder blade and soaked my clothing. I touched the area where Sebastian had bit into me with my trembling fingers and allowed the tears to soak my features as I watched him walk away. He left me there alone, and I had never felt emptier. I heard the front doors of the palace slamming shut as he left. I flinched at the loud sound. The mark on my neck was healing quickly, but the ghost of his teeth sinking into me remained on my flesh. His scarlet gazes once poured into me, and I can still see them whenever I close my eyes. "Oh, my moon goddess," Caroline said from the doorway. She rushed over to me, grabbing my arm to help me to my feet. "What happened, Your Majesty?" "I have to leave, Caroline," I told her, nearly hyperventilating. "I need to get out of here." "Okay," she breathed, but I could sense the confusion behind her voice. "I'll get Louis to—" "No," I said quickly, interrupting her words. "No, Louis, I need to get out of here myself. Can you call me a cab?" "A cab?" Caroline asked, eyeing me carefully. "Yes, a cab," I confirmed. "I need to pack my things." I went upstairs without saying anything more. I grabbed the suitcase I stored under the bed and began packing the clothes I initially came to the palace with. I wasn't going to take anything that was bought for me after I arrived. I didn't want anything more from him. I just needed to get out of here. Tears fell from my eyes as I continued packing my things. My hands trembled with each clothing item I grabbed. I finished packing my suitcase and zipped it shut. Caroline stood in the doorway, staring at me with a timid frown on her face. "The cab is outside," she told me. I lost track of time while I was packing. I gave her a small smile that didn't reach my eyes and thanked her as I brushed past her. I wasn't sure if I was ever going to see her again, but I knew I wasn't planning on coming back to this palace. My conversation with Emily played again in my mind when she told me she was pregnant. A jab of pain coursed through my chest, and I had to stop walking to deal with the pain. I could feel Nora's agony from within me. The betrayal and heartache she felt nearly paralyzed me. I had to push past the pain and continue to make my way to the cab. I didn't give Louis a look when I got outside. I ignored him and got into the cab that was parked behind him. I knew he was staring at me confused, but I didn't have the heart to tell him what was going on or to tell him goodbye. I wiped my swollen and red eyes with the back of my sleeve and turned away from the palace, looking out the opposite window towards the town. "Take me to the hospital," I told the cab driver with limited emotions in my voice. "Yes, Your Majesty," he said as he pulled away from the palace. I was surprised when I got to the hospital, and I didn't sense Sebastian. I figured he would have been here with Emily by now, telling her the good news that I was leaving, and they can finally be together. But from the scent of the hospital, it doesn't seem like he was there at all today. It didn't matter, though. I wasn't there to see Sebastian. I needed to see Liam. I didn't want him to think I was abandoning him, and if my father did what he promised, I was back on the visitor list. "You can't go in there!" Nancy barked as I reached Liam's door. I turned to her. I knew I must have looked like a mess because of all the crying and the blood stains on my clothing. She was rushing toward me, but as I turned to face her, she paused and stared around my face with disgust. "You aren't on his visitor list," she said, lowering her tone. "Check again," I told her, my voice feeling and sounding raw. "My father was supposed to re-add me to the list. It's not up to your father, it's up to Liam. He doesn't want you in there. You know we must go by what the patients want," she reminded me, folding her arms across her chest. "He's my brother, Nancy," I shot back to her, trying not to get too worked up. "That doesn't matter." "I need to say goodbye," I told her, cutting off her words. That silenced her, and she stared at me with wide and confused eyes. "I'm leaving," I explained. "Leaving," she repeated, dumbfounded. "I'm leaving the hospital. I'm leaving the pack. I'm going away, and I don't know when I'm returning. I just need to say goodbye," I told her, allowing a stray tear to escape my eye. She stared at me for a long while, trying to figure out if I was serious or not. "You just need to say goodbye? Then you're leaving? For good?" she asked, eyeing me carefully. I nodded once. "Yes," I told her. She sighed and turned away. "Make it quick." I sighed relieved as I opened Liam's door and slipped inside. His room was dimly lit because he was getting some rest, but thankfully he was awake once I got there. He turned his head to face me, and his eyes widened with surprise. I let a sob escape through my lips without meaning to, and I pressed my back against the door, trying to keep myself on my feet. My body trembled as I stared at my paling and thinning brother. He looked a lot sicker than he had a few days ago, and my heart was tugging painfully for him. More painful than when my heart tugged for Sebastian. Liam was my brother. He was all I had. I couldn't lose my brother. "Hannah?" he asked. I sniffled and wiped the tears from my eyes as I approached his bedside. "Hey, Liam," I said, trying to keep my voice strong for him. "What are you doing here?" he asked, looking towards the door. "It's okay," I assured him, grabbing onto his hands gently and squeezing them. "I won't be here long." "If Dad," he tried to say, but I shushed him, closing my eyes before more tears spilled from them. "He's not going to know I'm here," I promised. "He told me if you stayed away, I could see Mom again," Liam said, keeping his tone low. I felt my heart stopping in my chest at his words. "What?" I gasped. "He told me that you wouldn't let it happen and that he can make it happen. But you must stay away," Liam continued to explain. His eyes were large and growing misty as he continued to stare at me. It was clear that he truly believed that our father was going to take him to see our mother. She was dead. It wasn't possible. Unless... "Liam," I said, leaning closer to him, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. Dad is dangerous. He isn't out for your best interest. He told me you'd say that," Liam interrupted. "I'm telling you the truth, Liam," I told him firmly. "As your sister, I need you to trust me. You can't let Dad in here anymore. You need to take him off the visitor list." "But what about Mom?" Liam asked, tears welling in his eyes. "Liam, Mom is gone," I told him. My voice started quivering as I processed my own words. "She's not coming back. There is no seeing her." "But Dad said—" "I know what he said," I shouted. I didn't mean to yell as loudly as I did, but he flinched at my harsh tone. I sighed and stared down at my hands. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to yell." "Why are you angry?" Liam asked, staring around my face. "Don't you want to see Mom?" "Of course I do," I whispered, meeting his eyes. "But we can't. I need you to trust me. For right now, just stay away from Dad. Stay away until I come back." "Where are you going?" he asked. I stayed silent for a little longer as I processed my thoughts. I wrapped my arms around him and pulled him close to me. I kissed the top of his head before releasing him and standing from his bed. "I love you, Liam," I told him, trying to give him a brave smile. "I promise, I will be back for you." Sebastian's POV. Sebastian watched from afar as Hannah left the hospital. She had tears in her eyes and her features were pale. He had never seen her look so broken before, and it pained him. He was the one that did that to her, and he couldn't do anything to fix it at that moment. He thought if he left her alone, she would be able to process what had happened and she wouldn't leave. She would understand that he did that for her own well-being. He marked her as his, and now she was officially his chosen mate. Regardless of if she wanted to believe it or not, she can feel the mate bond between them. But she was too upset to understand what it meant. He didn't want to watch her leave. He wanted to wrap his arms around her and pull her close to his body. He wanted to have her scent fill his nose and have her saliva all to himself. But he couldn't. The most he could do at that moment was watching her. She looked around for a moment before slipping into the cab. She could sense him nearby, but couldn't see him. She had a worried expression on her face, but shook it off before disappearing into the cab. The cab drove off, leaving Sebastian alone in the streets with his wolf. A wolf that was in a panic, thinking that Hannah was never going to return. A wolf that was getting too worked up that Sebastian thought he was going to lose control. His breathing became harsh, and redness began invading his vision. He had to get away from the hospital before he caused some harm to innocent wolves around him. "We need to go after her," Eric insisted, his tone harsh and urgent. "No, we need to let her go for right now," Sebastian said to his wolf in return. They ran quickly from the hospital grounds and towards the palace. He could feel every movement of his body pulsating around him. Every fiber of his being was raging, and he couldn't contain himself any longer. It wasn't even the full moon yet, and he felt a fiery desire burning from inside him. He was beginning to lose himself to his wolf, and he roared out with hatred. He clenched his fists, trying to keep himself calm, but Eric was losing his mind. "We can't let her leave us," Eric howled. Sebastian ignored his wolf, trying to take deep breaths to calm himself down. They picked up speed as they ran. his scarlet eyes peering around the woodland forest and trying to find something to attack. His entire body was shaking with rage, and he needed blood to make himself feel better. "Nothing will help us," Eric said. "We need to go after her." "Shut up," Sebastian snapped. "Just shut the hell up." This silenced Eric, but it didn't make Sebastian feel any better. They spent the rest of the evening hunting and killing animals around the forest, leaving a trail along the grounds. He had lost track of time and nearly all his senses as he roamed the forest. He made his way back to the palace, still feeling a rage boiling inside of him. One look at his face, and his servants knew to stay clear of him. They scattered instantly and went into hiding. The only servant that didn't run was Hannah's handmaiden, Caroline. Since Hannah moved into the palace, Caroline had grown much braver than when she first started. She was the maid that the other maids looked to for courage. She was their leader, whether she saw it or not. But Sebastian saw it, and Hannah saw it as well. She was a maid, but she was also the closest thing that Hannah had to a friend. Caroline stood in the center of the foyer, and she looked defeated. She was saddened by Hannah's sudden departure, and he was sure she knew the reasoning behind her leaving. "She took all of her stuff," Caroline said, choking back tears as she stared at the ground. "She's gone, Your Majesty." His breathing grew heavier, and he curled his lip up to growl at her. He wanted to provoke some fear into her so she would scurry away like all the others, but she didn't. She looked up at him, narrowing her eyes, and she stood her ground. "Hannah had taught me a lot while she lived here," Caroline said, keeping her voice even. "One of which is that you aren't the monster everyone makes you out to be. I don't think you are going to hurt me." "Leave," Sebastian hissed in a low tone, keeping his scarlet eyes locked on hers. "Now, I'm leaving," she told him. "Not because I fear you, but because you need to figure out how to get her back." She turned away and began walking towards the maid's quarters. He stared after her until she disappeared through the doors. He clenched his fists again and unclenched them, trying to keep his body still and at the moment. He could smell his stepmother nearby, and he wasn't in the mood to deal with her. If she showed her face, he was worried he would rip her throat out, and he couldn't have her blood on his hands. He rushed towards the stairway and made his way to his bedroom, the room he once shared with Hannah. Her things were gone, the things she initially brought to the palace. He stared at the matching pajamas that were neatly folded on his bed, and he stumbled toward them. He sat on his bed and held her pajamas in his hands. The softness of the fabric brought him back to the night she first wore them. He held her close to his body and felt the cotton of her pajamas rubbing against his skin. He brought the pajamas to his face and breathed in her scent. They still smelled like her. He felt himself coming down from his anger. Eric was calming down only slightly. He released the pajamas, and he felt fury rising through him again. He stood from his bed and went towards the bag of stuff they purchased to help his madness. He grabbed the jasmine flower and brought them to his nose, breathing them in. He didn't feel any different. If anything, he felt more antsy and impatient. Eric was growing annoyed with his delay and was begging to go after Hannah. Sebastian continued to ignore him as he sprayed the cologne around his room. Hannah mentioned the cologne was designed to help anxieties, but the more he thought of Hannah on her own, the more anxious he got. "It's not working," Eric hissed. "None of it is working. We need Hannah." Sebastian shook his head, refusing to believe that Hannah was the only thing that could stop his madness. There had to be another way. Hannah didn't want him. She had left and the full moon was a couple of weeks away. "When are you going to admit that we need her?" Eric asked, his temper rising even more. Sebastian finally sighed and released the perfume back onto his dresser. Eric was right. They needed Hannah. After a long pause, Sebastian finally said, "Let's go after her." Hannah's POV. Blood poured down the nape of my neck as I tried to escape his grip. He wouldn't release me, regardless of how loudly begged. His scarlet eyes stared into me, tormenting my wolf. Nora cried to him to release us, but he wouldn't listen. He held me closer to him and bit into me again. Again and again, he marked me as his. "You will never get rid of me," he said in a harsh tone. Tears sprang from my eyes as I fell to the ground in a puddle of my own blood. He stood over me with zero emotions crossing his face. He was someone I no longer recognized. He was someone I no longer wanted to know. Emily appeared beside him, and her eyes were scarlet, matching his. She was at least 7 months pregnant, and she had a smile on her face that sent a sudden chill down my spine. She wrapped her arms around him and pulled him close. He willingly went to her, staring at her with love and admiration. My heart shattered in my chest watching their embrace. He was still covered in my blood as their lips neared one another. "Earth to Hannah!" A voice cut through my nightmare, shattering the illusion created before my eyes. I opened my eyes groggily and winced as the brightness of the sun shone through the curtains and landed directly on me. I groaned and turned away, throwing the covers over my face. 5 more minutes, I muttered. I felt like I hadn't slept at all. "Not a chance," Raya said, pulling the covers off my body. "We are going to be late for our first day of class." I sat up and stared over at my overly enthusiastic roommate. Her short, curly brown hair bounced around the sides of her face as she twirled around our shared dorm. She was already wearing her salmon-colored hospital scrubs, which hugged her perfectly curved body like it was made for her specifically. "Wake up," she said again with a chuckle. "Seriously, Hannah, we can't be late." I heard Professor Lionel is a hard ass. I almost forgot that Dr. Lionel was going to be our main professor for this program. I met him briefly a few weeks ago at the medical banquet, but he didn't really say much to me. I mainly spoke to Dr. Montgomery. I've been at this school for about a week, and I've only seen Dr. Montgomery once when I first arrived at the pack. The Blue Moon Pack. It was a small oceanside town with warm temperatures and mainly known for its medical school and teaching hospital. It was an honor to be accepted into such a school and accepted into the pack. Upon entering the school, Dr. Montgomery made me a promise that she wouldn't reveal my identity as the Luna Queen to my peers or teachers. Only Dr. Lionel would know because he met me when I was with Sebastian at the banquet. But besides that, nobody knew the truth. Not even my roommate, Raya, who happened to be a Raya sunshine. "I'm awake," I told her as I slipped out of bed. "Good, because we have 15 minutes before class," she said, grabbing my arm and pulling me toward the bathroom. "Get moving." I chuckled at her enthusiasm. My scrubs and trench coat were already in the bathroom waiting for me as I entered. I stared at myself in the mirror with disgust plain on my face. I couldn't believe my appearance. I could hardly recognize myself. I had worry lines all around my features and dark circles under my eyes. Every time I tried to sleep, I would either have a nightmare about Sebastian, or I would have a nightmare about my brother. My heart tugged for both. I worried so much for my brother that it was making me sick. I could hardly eat. I couldn't sleep. He wasn't answering my phone calls. Now that class was officially starting, I wasn't sure how I was going to get through it. I rubbed my sore temples with my finger as I turned on the faucet to the sink. I splashed the cold water onto my face and allowed it to calm my body. I rubbed my fingers against the mark Sebastian left on the back of my neck. I shuddered as the memory surfaced in my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still see him. I hid the mark with my hair so nobody would see that I was mated to someone. I didn't want anyone to know my secret. "Hurry up!" I could hear Raya shouting from outside the door. "You know you can go without me," I shouted back, but a smile appeared on my lips. I stripped my clothing and grabbed my scrubs. "No way," she said in return. "We are roommates. We started here at the same time. We are in this together till the end." I could hear the nervousness in her tone. She was frightened for our first day. I couldn't blame her. We only had one shot at this, and it was nerve-wracking. I would be more nervous if I didn't already have so much on my mind. I finished dressing, and I opened the bathroom door. Raya stood before me with wide and worried eyes, but she looked relieved when she saw I was ready. "Come on," she said eagerly, draping her arm around mine and pulling me towards the door. I chuckled as we entered the crowded hallway. Students were roaming around all over and trying to get themselves ready for the first day of classes. I hadn't really spoken to a lot of people at the school, other than Raya, but a couple of girls I became familiar with greeted me as we passed. I paused for a moment as a familiar sensation came over me. I thought that I had sensed Sebastian nearby. A tremble went through my body, and I let out a shiver, which provoked Raya to stop and stare over at me with a worried expression. "Are you okay?" she asked, eyeing me carefully. I gave her a strong smile and nodded, shaking the feeling from my body. It must have been my imagination. Since leaving the King's pack to come to the Blue Moon pack, it's almost like I can feel him wherever I go. I still dream of him strongly, and when I wake up, it feels like he's right next to me. But the feeling only lasts a moment, and then it disappears. I was losing my mind. We walked quickly through the schoolyards, passing by the small chapel with a statue of the moon goddess sitting out front. As we passed, we stopped in front of the statue and curtsied to pay our respects to the goddess. The classroom was a large conference hall, and it was already packed with students when we arrived. For a moment, I was worried we wouldn't get a good seat, but thankfully Raya spotted a couple of seats towards the center of the room. We sat together and pulled out our notebooks. Dr. Lino wasted no time to start his lecture for the morning. Everyone was working hard at taking notes, but my mind was elsewhere. I tried hard to pay attention, but I couldn't stop thinking about Sebastian. I wondered what he was doing and if he was getting along all right without me. I wondered if he moved Emily into the palace to replace me already. I felt sickened by the thought. Then I thought about Liam and if he was all right. I hoped he listened to me and isn't allowing our father to visit him. Worry was overfilling me. I didn't realize everyone's eyes were turned in my direction, even Dr. Lenol, until Raya nudged me painfully from the side. She was also staring at me. "Do we have a problem, Miss Hannah?" Dr. Lenol asked from the front of the room. I felt my face redden, confused about what was going on. I stammered. "No, sir." "Then tell me why you failed to answer my first question," he asked, pressing his lips into a firm line. I felt my face heating up as everyone continued to stare at me. I had no answer for him. I felt so ashamed. He shook his head in disapproval as he turned to the rest of the class. "Can someone else tell me another name for the clavicle?" he asked loudly. "Collarbone, Professor," another student said. He nodded and turned back to me, narrowing his eyes. "There's no place in my classroom for distractions. I suggest you get it together, or you get out." Hannah's POV. "What the hell, Hannah?" Raya said as we got to the lunchroom. "You didn't tell me you knew Professor Lionel." "I don't really know him," I told her. We grabbed a couple of sandwiches from the lunch line and were searching for a place to sit. We found an empty table on the far side of the lunchroom and we sat down. "He knows your name," she cooed excitedly. I had to stifle a smile as I looked over at her. "He yelled at me," I reminded her, wanting to forget the entire ordeal. "We met once. He went to my old pack for a medical banquet. He didn't really say much to me, though." "Well, you must have made quite the impression for him to remember you," she said, taking a bite of her sandwich. I shook my head but chuckled. "Are you excited for the first day of work today?" "I can't wait to get my hands dirty," she said. It was obvious she's never worked in a hospital before because of how excited she was about it. Though, I was excited to get back to work after having the last couple of weeks off. Before I could answer her question, Sebastian's scent filled the lunchroom. It hit me suddenly, and I felt frozen in my seat. Nora tensed, and I could feel her unease as my eyes scanned the area. There was no sign of him. Why was I sensing someone that wasn't even there? Was it because of the mark? I had to keep myself from touching the mark on the back of my neck. I couldn't let Raya know that I was marked by someone, especially not by the Wolf King. She would never look at me the same. "Are you okay?" Raya asked, eyeing me carefully. I nodded. "Yes," I told her as I finished my sandwich. "But we should get to the hospital." The hospital was next to the school campus, so we were able to walk. Our days going forward would consist of morning classes and then an afternoon into the evening at the hospital. I still wasn't sure when we were going to be able to get homework done, but Raya didn't seem to be too worried about it. The interns were gathering around the halls, waiting for their resident doctors. By the time we got there, we were considered late. "Nice of you ladies to join us," said one of the doctors. "You'll be with Dr. Smith." He pointed to a tall and beautiful female doctor across the hall. She was staring at me with her icy blue gaze and long lashes. Her sleek blonde hair was pulled back into a low ponytail, and she had her arms folded across her chest as she stared into me. I found her intimidating before even speaking to her. Raya tensed from beside me, but she kept by my side as we approached Dr. Smith. "You must be Hannah. I've heard about you," she muttered, keeping her eyes locked on me. I felt my face redden and my body tense. Had she heard that I was the Luna Queen? "Doctor, Davis tells me that you are one of his best interns," she said with a scoff. I wasn't sure what to say in response. "But now you're in my hospital. While you are at my hospital, you are nothing. You are worse than nothing. You are scum. When I move, you move. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, doctor," I said, trying not to sound frightened by this woman. She turned away from me and began walking down the hall with a couple of interns following behind her. Raya and I gave one another a worried look before following her as well. For the rest of the day, we took notes as she made her rounds. She wouldn't let us touch a patient or speak out of context. If we spoke without her asking us a direct question, she would yell at us. It was definitely different than when I was at the King's Hospital. By the time we got back to our dorm, we were utterly exhausted. We couldn't even focus on our homework. Raya was asleep quickly, and I laid awake, staring at my ceiling. I worried that if I fell asleep, I would have another dream about Sebastian. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see his angry face from the night he marked me. I shuddered again just thinking about it. I grabbed my cell phone and decided to give my brother a call. Not that he would answer me. He hasn't answered me since I left a couple of weeks ago. The phone went straight to voicemail, and my heart tugged painfully. I couldn't call the hospital because I was worried Nancy would answer. She wouldn't let me talk to my brother if I asked her, and I wasn't in the mood to argue with her. I threw my phone on my bedside table and lay back on my bed. I sighed, allowing sleep to overcome me. "You will never get rid of me." His voice rang in my head again and again, as it does every night. Those fatal words invaded my thoughts. Tears soaked my pillow by the time I woke up the next morning. I wiped my eyes, afraid that Raya would catch me crying, but thankfully she was in the shower when I woke up. I cleaned my face off the best I could, but more tears kept falling from my eyes. Nora was in mourning over the loss of our relationship, and my body was too exhausted to move from my bed. But I knew I had to get up and get going with the day. I tried to keep a low profile for most of the morning. Raya didn't question why I was quiet. She just assumed I was still exhausted from the day before. She looked tired too, and less excited than she was yesterday. I hated that this place was already destroying her bright spirit. In the lunchroom, we met up with a couple of other students whom we became friendly with over the days. As Raya was grabbing her lunch, I sat with one of our friends, Connor. "So, I hear the school is having a carnival on campus this weekend," Connor said, taking a bite of his salad and keeping his eyes on me. I met his eyes with a frown, unsure of where he was going with that. "I was thinking maybe you could go with me?" he asked. I could tell he was nervous. I rose my eyebrows. "You mean all of us? Like a group?" I asked. He opened his mouth to say something, but closed it quickly. I then realized that he didn't mean it as a group. He wanted to go with me alone. He wanted it to be a date. I felt my face redden at the thought. If Sebastian found out I was going on a date with another guy, he would have my head. He'd probably kill the guy too. I thought about Emily and how Sebastian supposedly got her pregnant, and my heart tugged painfully again in my chest. "Okay," I said after a long pause. "Yeah, we can go to the carnival together." Hannah's POV. "The last time I was at a carnival was with Sebastian. We had a good time, eating food he never thought he'd consume, going on rides and laughing. It was fun until we ran into Amy, and we got into an altercation over the fact that she went to see my brother. That was one of the better days Sebastian and I had. Since then, everything started slowly coming down, and he wasn't the same person. I felt sad thinking about it, but I had to brush the thought out of my head. The carnival on campus was a lot bigger than I thought it was going to be. They managed to get an entire Ferris wheel and a couple of other rides as well. It was the first day off we've had all week, and it was much needed. Raya went to the carnival as well, but she went with a few other friends while I went with Connor. I could tell he was excited about this carnival, and I didn't want to let him down. Even I had to admit that he wasn't bad to look at, but he was very young looking. He always gave me this lopsided grin and tousled his own hair between his fingers, giving it a messy look. As we walked through the carnival, in the corner of the shadow region, I thought for a moment that I saw Sebastian. Even Nora was tense as we met the familiar scarlet eyes of the Wolf King. My breathing got caught in my throat, and even though we were outside, it felt like there was no air to breathe. The area was filled with his familiar scent. It was like wrapping me in a warm blanket and tugging me toward him. My body trembled in fear, and I bit my bottom lip hard to keep from crying. But just as soon as I saw him, I blinked, and he was gone. Once I could no longer see him, his scent was also gone. "What is wrong with us?" I asked my wolf. She stayed silent, unsure of how to answer me. "Are you okay, Hannah?" Connor asked, eyeing me carefully. I tore my eyes from the area I thought I saw Sebastian in and looked up at Connor. There was concern in his gaze, and I found it kind of sweet. I smiled up at him and nodded. "Yeah, sorry," I said. He gave me a crooked grin and draped an arm around my shoulder. This was the first time he's done something like that, and I felt a little uncomfortable. I tried to wiggle further away, but I think he got the wrong idea, and he only pulled me closer to him. He nuzzled his face against the top of my hair. "I'm so glad you agreed to go out with me," he whispered against me, the warmth of his breath touching my features and sending a chill down my spine. I managed to pull away with him, my face flushed, and gave him a nervous chuckle. "Yeah, I'm having fun," I told him, trying to keep the tension out of my words. I looked around, trying to avoid his eyes. "Have you seen Raya?" He frowned, but eventually looked around as well. We both spotted Raya towards one of the food vendors, and we went straight toward her. She was laughing and eating with some girls that I recognized from the hospital. "Hannah," she said happily as I approached. I wrapped my arm through hers and pulled her away from the crowd so we could be alone. "He thinks it's a date," I whispered to her. She laughed and looked over at Connor, who was watching us from a distance. "Isn't it?" she asked, raising her eyebrows. "I mean, you two came here together." "As friends," I told her. "I don't want to date him." "Why?" she asked, surprised by my words. "He's so hot." "Hot?" I couldn't help but ask. I wanted to laugh. I wouldn't consider Connor hot. Sebastian was hot. He was the definition of hot. If only Raya knew the truth, she would understand there was no comparison. But I couldn't tell her the truth. Sebastian and I were separated, and I had to stop thinking about him like that. But part of me couldn't help it. Sebastian really was hot. He was even hotter without his mask. Not that he'd ever take it off in front of me on purpose. "I just don't want to date," I told her, trying to keep my tone low. "Then, be honest with him about it," she told me. I sighed. I knew she was right. I had to be honest, at least as honest as I could be. I nodded and thanked her for the advice. As we turned back to walk in his direction, I paused. He was gone. Sebastian's POV. Every day Sebastian would see Hannah, and he couldn't look away from her. She was making friends, and she was smiling for the first time in weeks. He never thought he would ever see her smile like that again, but she looked genuinely happy. She still thought of him often, though, and he could feel it. Her wolf searched for him in crowded areas, and they could sense him when he was nearby. The mate bond was a lot stronger than he thought it would be. Hannah worked hard, and he admired her for that, but she was also distracted because of how much pain he had caused her. He could feel her every sense and every emotion, and it pained him knowing he was the one who did that to her. He wanted to run to her and make himself known, but he feared she would only pull further away. He couldn't handle it if she demanded a divorce again. Not that he would ever sign those papers. Sebastian followed Hannah to the campus carnival. She was attending it with a guy, and that was infuriating for him. He clenched his fists as he watched the two of them together. He almost made himself known to her. It got far enough to a point where she met eyes with him, but he managed to get away after seconds. The guy was rubbing his face against her hair. He was getting too close to her, and he needed to put a stop to it. "He's alone," Eric hissed. "That's our chance." Before Sebastian could stop himself, he was grabbing the guy by the shoulders and pulled him towards the shadows of the carnival. He had to keep himself hidden. Hannah couldn't know that he had followed her. She would never trust him again if she knew the truth. The guy looked terrified, but he didn't say anything as Sebastian pulled him away. His entire body shuddered violently as he was faced with the Wolf King. His eyes widened in shock, and he stammered, but Sebastian held his hand over the guy's mouth and told him he needed to keep quiet. "Stay away from her," Sebastian hissed. The guy looked genuinely confused for a moment as he met Sebastian's eyes. "Hannah," Sebastian clarified. "Stay away from Hannah. She isn't yours to have." The guy's breath grew shaky, but he nodded quickly. "Yes, Your Majesty," the guy said. So he did recognize Sebastian after all. Sebastian scoffed and released his hold on him. "Next time, I won't be as nice," Sebastian threatened. Hannah's POV. "I can't believe he just left you at the carnival by yourself," Raya said with an eye roll. "I wasn't by myself," I told her. "I was with you." "Still," she muttered, "it's not right. You went there together. He should have stayed till the end and made sure you got back to your dorm all right." "I didn't take offense to it," I told her. We were walking to the hospital for our afternoon shift. It's been a few days since the carnival, and I just wanted to brush the memory out of my head. But there was still a part of me that worried about why Connor disappeared so suddenly. "Have you spoken to him since?" she asked, eyeing me from the side. I shook my head with a small frown on my lips. "No," I told her. "It's almost like he's avoiding me." "Weird," she breathed. We entered the hospital, and I instantly felt a strange feeling. It wasn't like the other feelings I had when I could sense the ghost of Sebastian nearby. This was different. Before I could bring anything up to Raya, Dr. Smith was stomping toward us. Her aura was so dark that it made me tremble. I took a step away from her, but she reached me with a quick speed. "Care to tell me why the diagnosis on my patient's chart is fucked up?" She barked at me, narrowing her darkened gaze. I furrowed my eyebrows together, unsure of what she meant. She showed me the chart that she assigned me the day before, and I stared at it with dismay. I don't usually make mistakes like that. I had no idea how to respond to this. "There's no room in my hospital for fuck-ups like this," she hissed. "If you aren't going to take this work seriously, get the hell out." "I don't know what happened," I stammered, still staring at the chart. "You messed up," she growled. "That's what happened. Get out. I don't need you here today." She turned away and started stomping away. "What?" I breathed. "But—" "I said get out," she hissed again. "If you are going to be distracted and make stupid mistakes like this, I don't need you." Raya and I watched as she disappeared down the hall. The hospital fell silent, and heat rose into my cheeks. "At least now you can get some homework done," Raya said under her breath, trying to lighten the mood. I let out the breath I was holding as I turned to her. "Are you going to be okay here without me for today?" I asked, eyeing her carefully. She looked nervous, but she nodded once and gave me a confident smile. "Yes," she answered. She gave me a brief hug before pulling away. "I'll see you tonight." I nodded as I turned and left the hospital. My entire body was trembling. I had never been yelled at like that before, and I felt humiliated. Thankfully, there weren't many people in the hospital, but where did she get off speaking to her interns like that? What kind of teacher and doctor was she? I tried to brush the thought out of my head as I made my way back to the college campus. Once I reached the campus grounds, I could smell Sebastian's scent all around me. I paused for a moment and allowed his scent to calm my nerves. Nora felt bliss until we remembered how he forcibly marked us, not to mention his betrayal with Emily. I held my breath and closed my eyes, trying to keep the tears from spilling down my features. It was getting to be too much, everything happening all at once. I was beginning to lose control of myself, and I wasn't sure what to do. It hurt to keep going. Everything just hurt. I bowed my head slightly as I waited for his scent and presence to pass. The only thing I could think of was that it was the mark he left on me. He wouldn't have followed me to this school knowing how I felt. Would he? He would have made himself known to me by now. His presence has been evident since the first day we arrived, Nora breathed. She was right. I had felt him nearby a lot when we first arrived at the school. I thought it was only my imagination, but over time the feeling only grew stronger. I wished I knew for certain if I was losing my mind or not. A few times I thought I had seen him, but as soon as I blinked, he was gone. I knew it had to be my imagination. I returned to my dorm. It felt bigger and emptier with Raya not there. We usually went everywhere together and were rarely at the dorm alone, so I wasn't used to the solitude. I ignored the empty feeling of the room and went to my desk to get some homework done. Sebastian's scent filled me once again, and I dropped my pencil onto my desk. I buried my face into the palms of my hands and let out an exaggerated sigh. I just wanted the feeling to stop. I touched my fingers to the mark on the back of my neck and it felt warm, much warmer than it had been before. What did that even mean? The scent was gone again, and I was finally able to concentrate on the rest of my homework. Raya came back to the dorm a few hours later and we grabbed some dinner. By the time we got back to the dorm together, we were completely exhausted and ready for the day to end. But as usual, I was too afraid to sleep. I knew as soon as I closed my eyes, I would see his angry scarlet gaze pouring into me and his blood-soaked features, knowing that the blood belonged to me. I would hear his cruel words in my ears, and I would be scared awake. But as I did every night, I got through it without Raya being suspicious. Sitting in the lecture hall of the school, I thought I was going to pass out. After a sleepless night, I was so exhausted I was having trouble keeping my eyes open. Raya kept nudging me whenever I started drifting off, and I gave her a sheepish grin, whispering that I was fine, but she didn't look so certain. As we were assigned our work, Raya was hard at work and didn't notice that I had drifted off again. As soon as sleep started overtaking me, I could see Sebastian's eyes in my mind. I nearly felt his grip on my shoulders as he pulled his teeth toward the back of my neck and claimed me as his. I heard a loud slamming sound, and I was startled awake, not knowing that Dr. Linall was standing before me. He dropped a book onto my desk to wake me. My breathing got caught in my throat as he stood over me, his lip curling and his eyes narrowing. "What do we have here?" he said, his tone low and threatening. "Sleeping in my classroom?" "No, Professor," I said, trying to come up with something else to say. "You are never going to make it in this profession. I am ashamed to have someone like you in my class. Dr. Davis promised me potential, but all I see is a failure," he hissed. I flinched at his words. The classroom was dead silent, and I could see all eyes were facing me, including Raya, who was shuddering from beside me. "I don't want to see you in my class again," he roared. "Get out!" "What kind of professor are you, to speak to a student with such disrespect?" A familiar voice sounded from the back of the class. Sebastian's scent filled the room, and my entire body tensed. I heard students all around the lecture hall gasping, and Dr. Linall lifted his gaze to look up at Sebastian. I could see the fury on Sebastian's face as he made his way closer to us. "You really thought you could speak to my Luna like that, and I wouldn't find out?" Sebastian asked. His voice was calm, but Dr. Linall visibly shivered. Dr. Linall backed away from me and bowed his head instantly. "Alpha King?" Hannah's POV. "This might not be my direct pack, but it's still my kingdom, and I won't have this kind of disrespect in my kingdom," Sebastian growled to a very frightened Dr. Linall, "especially not to my Luna." "I apologize, Your Majesty," Dr. Linall said, bowing his head. "I assure you, it won't happen again." I couldn't pull my eyes away from Sebastian. I couldn't believe he was standing in the middle of the lecture hall. That must have been why I've been sensing him all over the place. Because he was actually here. Has he been here since day one? He must have been. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until Dr. Linall addressed me. "I apologize, Luna Queen," Dr. Linall said with another bow in my direction. I couldn't feel my body due to how tense it was. I was in shock over what was happening, and only the soft sounds of Raya's voice brought me back to the present moment. "Luna Queen?" she asked under her breath. I could hear the heartbreaking betrayal in her tone, and I was too afraid to meet her eyes, knowing exactly what I was going to see. Sebastian was by my side quickly, offering me his arm. I stared at him with such dismay. Whenever I see him, all I could think about was the night he marked me. I also thought about his betrayal with Emily, and my heart hurt even more. "Let's go," he said, keeping his tone low and calm. "I can't just leave," I whispered, turning away from him. "Hannah," he warned. I heard Raya take in a sharp breath as Sebastian addressed me by my name. It was clear he wasn't going to leave until I went with him. Without saying anything or looking at anyone, I packed my belongings into my bag and stood. Everyone was still watching me, including Raya and Dr. Linol. I draped my arm around Sebastian's to make it look like I was all right and allowed him to pull me from the lecture hall. I waited until we were outside before pulling myself away from him. He paused to turn to me, looking around to make sure no one was around before either of us lost our cool. "What are you doing here?" I asked, fury clear on my face. "You think I was going to let you come to this school alone?" he asked, narrowing his eyes at me. Of course, he still had the mask on his face, and I just wanted to rip it off and stomp on it. "You have no right to be here right now," I hissed, trying to keep my temper controlled. The level of betrayal I was feeling was too much for me to handle. "You are my Luna." "Was your Luna," I told him, pressing my lips together in a firm line. "You lost me as your Luna the day you decided to screw Emily and get her pregnant." "I didn't touch her, Hannah," he said, his eyes growing slightly scarlet. "You expect me to believe that?" I scoffed. I started to walk past him, but he grabbed my arm and halted me. "Yes," he said firmly, "I do expect you to believe that because it's the truth. I don't believe in lying, especially to my Luna." "Well, good thing I'm not your Luna anymore," I muttered, trying to keep the pain from my voice. "You are still my Luna," he told me. His voice sounded much calmer, and I had to choke back the tears that threatened to escape my eyes. "I want a divorce," I said, turning back to face him. "Sign the papers." "No," he said, his tone hardening. "I won't sign them." "Sebastian." "You will never get rid of me, Hannah," he said. His words made my heart stop in my chest. I stared around his serious face with wide and frightened eyes. He released my arm, but my legs were too numb to run from him. "What did you just say?" I asked. My voice was barely audible. "You will never get rid of me," he repeated in a softer tone. Those words, those very words that haunt me every night. His words sounded less threatening and cruel, and more like a promise, a vow. "Please, just go home," I said, pulling my eyes from him. "If you won't divorce me, at least let me stay here without you." "I can't just leave you here alone," he said. "You are my mate. I need to protect you." "Stop calling me that." "We never discussed being chosen mates." "Let's discuss it now," he said urgently, trying to get me to listen to him. "After you've already forced your mark on me?" I asked. I had to leave before tears welled up in my eyes. He fell silent, like he was speechless. I turned away from him without another word and walked away, surprised that he allowed me to walk away so easily. By the time I got back to my dorm, Nora was replaying the events that had just happened. He said that he never touched Emily and that he didn't believe in lying, especially to me. Then why would Emily tell me that she was pregnant? I saw how close they were getting to one another. The only thing that made sense was that they were having an affair. When I first asked him for a divorce, he was so angry with me that he marked me without my consent. None of it was making any sense anymore, but he said that nothing ever happened between him and Emily. After everything that had happened these last few weeks, I couldn't understand why I believed him. But I did. "Were you ever going to tell me?" Raya asked as she paced back and forth in our dorm. "Or were you going to keep that to yourself until graduation, Your Majesty?" "Stop it, Raya," I told her. I was sitting on my bed and pressing my legs to my chest. I didn't want anyone knowing. "We were supposed to be friends," she shouted. I could hear the hurt in her voice and my heart tugged for her. "At least I thought we were." "We are friends," I said softly. Besides, Caroline, who was my handmaiden, I never actually had a friend before, and I still wasn't sure how this worked. But she was so upset that I kept this secret from her that I realized quickly that friends don't keep this kind of thing from one another. I was being a terrible friend to her. "I'm sorry. How do I even address you?" she asked, sitting down on her own bed and staring over at me. "Hannah," I told her. "Call me Hannah." She shook her head in disbelief. "The Wolf King," she whispered, still trying to process everything. "I can't believe you are married to the Wolf King. You're the Luna Queen." She paused for a moment. "There's so much said about him. Is he really as vicious as everyone says?" I thought of when he forcibly marked me as his, and I shuddered at the memory, trying to wipe it from my mind. "It doesn't matter," I muttered. "My marriage to him is kind of a long story." She rose her eyebrows and leaned towards me, curiosity all over her face. "I have time," she said with a grin. Before I could say anything more, there was a knock on the door. She stood to open it, but I stood even quicker, which made her hesitate. I already knew who it was before she answered. I felt him approaching. As she opened the door and stared up at Sebastian, who was leaning against the doorframe and staring between the two of us, her entire body froze. It was like she forgot how to breathe. I didn't blame her for that. If I didn't already know Sebastian and was married to him, I would have felt the same way. I folded my arms across to my chest and stared at him with disbelief that he was there right now. "I need to speak with you," Sebastian said, staring directly at me. His gaze flashed down at Raya, who continued to stare up at him with shock before he met my eyes again. Alone. Hannah's POV. "Of course, Your Majesty," Raya said, flashing me a look. "I'll just take a walk." He said nothing to her as she walked past him, closing the door behind her. Sebastian stared at me for a long while, both of us staying silent. I eventually sighed and stood from my bed. "Why are you even here?" I asked him, folding my arms across my chest. "Like I already said, to protect you," he answered, keeping his voice even. "You are my mate." "Please stop saying that, Sebastian," I pleaded, trying to keep the hurt from my voice. The word mate didn't sound right coming from his mouth. I never even thought he wanted me as a mate until he marked me. "But it's true, Hannah," he said firmly. "We aren't divorcing. I know what Emily told you, but it isn't true." "I saw the test results," I told him. "They were fake." "Fake? Could Emily have faked a positive pregnancy test just to get me out of the way? I suppose with Nancy's help it was possible." A knot was forming in my stomach at the very thought of it. Had I fallen into their trap? I looked away from him, not wanting to meet his eyes. "If you won't come home with me, then I will stay here with you," Sebastian said, softening his tone. I peered up at him, surprised. "What about the pack?" I asked. "You can't just leave King's pack." "Beta Arnold is there, and he can take care of things while I'm gone," Sebastian explained. "Besides, Blue Moon is part of my kingdom, and it seems they need a king right now." It was true. The disrespect from teachers and employers was too much for anyone to handle. They needed authority or discipline in their lives. George Montgomery wasn't doing his job properly as Alpha. "I've been here for a few weeks, and I haven't even met him yet." "You won't be able to stay with me in this dorm," I told him, thinking about how Raya would feel majorly uncomfortable. "She's becoming a good friend to me, and I didn't want to lose that." "I have a room already," he told me. "It's close so I can still be near you." I knew there was no changing his mind. Maybe with him nearby, my nightmares will finally stop. At least, I hoped they would. I wasn't sure how many more sleepless nights I could handle. "I'll get out of here now, though," he said, walking toward the door. "That annoying girl will be returning soon." Annoying girl? Was he talking about Raya? "Raya is my friend," I told him. He gave me a weird look but didn't say anything as he left. Just as Sebastian had said, Raya showed up moments later. She looked around worriedly for a moment before realizing I was alone. She sighed relief as she entered the room. "What happened?" she asked. "He's staying for a while," I answered. Her eyes widened with shock. "What?" she breathed. "Like at the school? With you? Here?" I nodded once. "Yes, but in a different room," I assured her. "Do you think it's safe for him to be here?" She finally asked the question I knew was itching in her mind. "I don't know," I breathed. "I hope so." A few days later, in the lunchroom, Sebastian sat with Raya and me. Everyone else was too frightened to go near us. Not that I could blame them, honestly. Sebastian's presence was extremely intimidating. Sebastian stared down at the food with a disgusted look. He wasn't used to eating school food. "You eat this crap?" he muttered to me as he picked at his sandwich. "Not everything is luxury," I told him, taking a bite of my sandwich. Raya couldn't keep her eyes off him. I could see the fear in her gaze, and her body trembled as she ate her food silently. I felt awful she was so uncomfortable. "Just eat it," I told him, taking another bite. He didn't argue with me. He ate the food without further remarks, but he didn't look pleased. Once we were almost finished eating, I heard his phone ringing in his pocket. He looked bothered as he stared at the caller ID. He stood and excused himself to take the phone call. I watched him from a distance. I couldn't understand what he was saying, but he seemed majorly annoyed. I had a worried feeling in the pit of my stomach. Raya was watching my face curiously. "I still can't get over that you're the Luna Queen," she breathed, eyeing me carefully. "How long have you been married?" "A few months," I answered, still looking over at Sebastian. "Wow," she breathed. She looked like she wanted to ask more questions, but Sebastian returned before she had the chance. She went back to eating silently and trying not to look directly at him. "I have to return to the king's pack," he said, meeting my eyes. "But I will be back tomorrow." "Is everything all right?" I asked with a frown. "Yes," he answered. "Just a meeting I need to tend to." Before he left Blue Moon, he took Raya and me back to our dorm. I couldn't help but be worried about this meeting he was going to. I felt like there was something he wasn't telling me, but I didn't pry too much about it. Raya looked more relieved that he was leaving for the night. It was like she could finally breathe and speak freely. I knew it was intimidating and intense having him around all the time, going from someone who only hears rumors about the Alpha King to someone who is around him all the time. I remembered what it was like for me when I first married him, and I had a few days to cope with things before it happened. Raya was being thrown into the mix of things, all because she had me as a roommate. I felt bad for keeping this secret from her. Maybe if I had told her the truth, it wouldn't have been this weird of a transition. We were studying at our desks for a while before Raya glanced over at me. Questions were lingering in her eyes. I didn't want to bring this up earlier because of the Alpha King being around, but I got word that there's going to be a party at the frat house tonight, she said, hopefulness in her eyes. I frowned. "A frat party?" I asked. I didn't like the sound of that. This wasn't a party school, and we had responsibilities the next morning. I didn't want to go to a party, especially when Sebastian wasn't there. "Yes," she said with a small smile. "I've never been to a frat party before, but they are saying everyone is invited." "Oh," I asked, glancing over at her. "I think we should go to it," she finally said in a breath. I shook my head, worry in my expression. "I don't think that's a good idea," I told her honestly. She looked disappointed. "Why?" she asked. "I just have a bad feeling about it," I told her. "Plus, Sebastian would be angry if I went to a party without him." "So don't tell him," she suggested with a shrug. "What he doesn't know won't hurt him." "That's not how it works, Raya," I told her, shaking my head. "He will know." "Then maybe he will understand," she said. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. This is our chance to meet more people and hang out with our peers. We can let loose and have a few drinks." "Drinks?" I asked. "Like get drunk?" "Exactly," she said, clapping her hands together excitedly. "I don't know," I said, uncertainty clear in my tone. "I just think it's better if we didn't go. Besides, we have class and work tomorrow. How would we look if we showed up hungover?" "Then we won't drink too much or stay too late," she said. "Please, Hannah. I don't know if you could tell, but I don't have any friends. You are the closest thing I have to a best friend. I can't do this without you." I sighed as I stared around her pleading face. She was speaking to my soul at that point. I didn't have any friends either. Living in a rogue town with my mother and brother for most of my life, and then being isolated by my father, those around the pack never spoke to me or tried to be friends with me. So I understood how she felt when it came to friendship. Truth be told, she was the closest thing I had to a best friend as well. Meeting her has been the highlight of coming to Blue Moon. "All right, fine," I said, defeated. "You win." Hannah's POV. I've never been to an actual party with peers before, and I had to admit that I was extremely nervous, especially Sebastian wasn't going to be there. But Raya was right. It was our time to meet new people and enjoy ourselves for a little while. It's been so stressful since I arrived at this school. Between work, school, and now Sebastian following me around everywhere, it was nice to be able to get away for a little while and have some fun. The party was held in one of the frat houses across the campus. We could already hear the loud music booming across the campus grounds and shaking the earth the closer we got. Raya had a look of excitement as we walked toward the house. She wore a blouse that rested above her pierced belly button and a skirt that hugged her thighs. I wore a pair of jeans and a tank top. I tried to be as casual as possible since attending this school because I wanted to fit in. There was a part of me that wanted to call Sebastian before entering the party to make sure he was all right, but I refrained from doing so. Raya draped her arm through mine and pulled me through the doors of the crowded house. It was filled with young students that were dancing and already drunk. I said hi to those I recognized, but for the most part, stuck by Raya's side. We found our way into the kitchen where they were serving alcohol. "Let's do shots!" Raya exclaimed loudly through the booming music. I gave her a nervous smile, but followed her through the crowd until we reached the kitchen. Everyone seemed to be having such a good time. Once Raya got a few drinks in her, she was also loosening up and enjoying herself. I couldn't help but shake the unsettling feeling I had in the pit of my stomach, though. I tried to brush the thought out of my mind and enjoy myself as well. But there was something about being there that didn't sit right with me. I felt like I was on guard, waiting for something to happen. "Have a drink," Raya said, eyeing my face carefully. "Loosen up." She was right. I had to stop being on edge. The point of being there was to loosen up and have some fun. So that's what I was going to do. After I did a few shots, I was already feeling a little lightheaded. I was never much of a drinker, maybe a glass of wine or two during dinner, but never hard alcohol. I wasn't sure how my body was going to react to it, but I thought I was going to fall over as I made my way through the house. Everyone was using the living room as the dance floor, so I pulled Raya with me to dance. I couldn't help but laugh at Raya's ridiculous dance moves. I admired that she could dance like no one was watching. "See," she said, laughing as well. "I knew you would have fun." She was right. It was fun. Sometimes during the party I lost track of time. The music seemed to be getting louder and the room was practically spinning, or I was spinning. I couldn't tell. I fell onto the couch and allowed myself to rest my head for a little while as the room continued to spin. Nobody seemed to be paying attention to me, though. They were all too busy getting even drunker and making fools of themselves. I heard some glass shattering from the kitchen and shook my head with a small smile, knowing they were so wasted that they were breaking things. After resting on the couch for a little while, I realized I hadn't seen Raya in a while. We were dancing together and drinking, but at some point she disappeared, leaving me alone to fend for myself. I frowned as I scanned the room. I saw a bunch of unfamiliar faces, none of which belonged to Raya. That unsettling feeling started returning to me, and I hoped it was just my imagination. "Raya?" I called for her, but my voice got drowned out by the crowd around me. The room was still spinning when I stood from the couch. I had to catch myself before falling over. I worried that I couldn't see Raya. It wasn't like her to just disappear like this. I scanned the room again, walking clumsily around the house, my heart beating heavily in my chest. My breathing was becoming rapid as more worry started overfilling me. Something was wrong. "Raya?" I said again. Still nothing. I ran into a hardened body, and I felt the cold liquid of his beer soaking my clothing and sticking to my skin. I winced at the coldness and stumbled backward. I glanced up at the man who didn't look at all apologetic. The man was coming from the stairway and rounded the corner when he knocked into me. He didn't look familiar to me, but he towered over me, and his body was largely built. His presence gave me a chill down my spine. He had a scar going down his face, and his lip curled up in disgust as he pushed past me, nearly knocking me to the ground. "Asshole," I muttered. The noise of the party drowned out my words, though, and he didn't seem to hear me. I stared up at the darkened stairway he had just come down from, and Nora tensed. She could sense something was seriously wrong. The stench of the beer invaded my nose, bringing my attention back to the spill on my clothes. I felt disgusting, and I could feel my stomach becoming queasy. I swallowed down the thickening saliva in my throat, but I could feel the contents of my stomach rushing to the surface. I shoved myself through the crowds of partying people until I reached the front door. The night air felt good on my heated features, and I felt like I could finally breathe. Even outside looked like it was spinning around. I was having trouble keeping a straightened stance and walking in a line. I scanned the outside area and saw a few people talking and drinking, but I still didn't see Raya. Before I had the chance to call for her again, the queasy feeling returned to me. I couldn't hold it in anymore. Holding onto my torso, I leaned over a bush and allowed myself to release the contents of my stomach. My breathing was harsh, and I tried to recover myself. As I lifted my gaze, my eyes fell on someone familiar talking with the guy with the scar. They were talking about something I couldn't quite hear, but they looked serious. The guy with the scar looked furious. Soon, some other men joined the conversation, and I was getting an even more unsettled feeling in the pit of my stomach. What were they talking about? The men dispersed and started going into the house, all of them looking furious. But one of them remained behind, staring at the house with a worried expression on his face. "Connor?" I breathed, loud enough to catch his attention. He met my eyes and they widened. I opened my mouth to say something more, but then I heard the screaming. Sebastian's POV. "Magnolia is furious," Beta Arnold said as Sebastian returned to the palace. "Rumors have speculated around the palace that the Luna Queen has left and Magnolia thinks the Luna Queen has been stealing from the palace." "That's ridiculous," Sebastian hissed, fury going through him. "I told her she needed to stand down, but she wants to search the Luna Queen's belongings," Arnold explained. "She isn't going near her," Sebastian growled. As soon as Arnold had explained this to him on the phone, he knew he needed to return to the palace and stop Magnolia from whatever she was planning. Before Sebastian had the chance to find Magnolia, a familiar voice roamed through his mind. "Sebastian?" It was Hannah's voice, his body stilled at the sound of her distraught voice. "I need you to return to me, please." Sebastian's anger toward Magnolia turned into worry for Hannah. There was something wrong. Her words were slurred slightly and she sounded like she was in a panic. Before he roamed further in the palace to search for Magnolia, he turned to Arnold. "Hold her off and don't let her go near Hannah or her things," Sebastian ordered as he ran toward the door. "There's something I need to take care of." "Can I trust you, Beta Arnold?" "Always." Hannah's POV. I sat on the ground near the bush with my knees pressed up to my chest and my hands over my ears. I thought I was going to pass out or throw up again, and I was trying hard to maintain myself. The music had stopped, and it was replaced with the tormenting sounds of screaming. At some point, Connor had disappeared into the house as well. I couldn't tell if he was being attacked by the others or if he was one of the wolves that were doing the attacking. Either or, I knew it was going to be a bloodbath. My first thought and main worry were that Raya was still somewhere in that house, and she was hurt. I had to get into the house and find her so we can get to safety. I wasn't sure I would be able to walk in there without falling over, though. I still felt so dizzy. Students ran from the house with faces of terror and covered in blood. It was unclear if it was their blood or someone else's, but tears sprang from their eyes as they screamed out in terror. I wasn't sure how long I have been sitting outside and how long the attack had been going, but it felt like it was never ending. The screaming started getting less and less as lives were being taken. Why was this happening? I felt Nora's panic. Part of her wanted to run into the building and save those who were still alive, but I knew we weren't strong enough to fight against the large wolves that had taken over the party. I pulled myself to my feet as Sebastian's scent made its way to my senses. I sucked in a sharp breath, knowing he was nearby. Sebastian ran through the campus grounds in his wolf form. His dark fur and scarlet eyes were unmistakable. He was the most glorious being, and my heart was beating heavily in my chest as I pulled myself to my feet. He wasn't running toward me, though I knew he knew I was there. He was running toward the frat house. I could see the fury in his eyes as his howls sounded in the night sky. The earth shook as he moved. He was large and more beast-like than any of them combined. He ran through the house, and I could hear the screaming ceasing entirely. I ran toward the house to see what was going on, but I was blocked by the crowd that was forming outside. By the time I reached the doors of the house, some of the wolves that started the attack were running for safety outside, including the guy with the scar across his face. He met my eyes briefly as he ran past me, but he said nothing. I saw Sebastian from across the house. He was standing in front of Connor, who was weakened and covered in blood. I knew right away that it wasn't his blood. He was panting heavily, and he was frightened, trembling away from the might wolf king that stood before him. I gasped as I stared around at the dead bodies surrounding them. Had Connor and those assholes done all of this? How could they be so cruel? I covered my mouth to keep from sobbing. Out of all the bodies I was seeing lying around the ground of the house, I didn't see Raya. I was slightly relieved that she wasn't amongst the dead, but I worried greatly about where she was. My eyes went over to the staircase where that scarred man came from earlier. Nora still felt uneasy, and I had an unsettled feeling. A boast of confidence appeared on Connor's face as he lunged toward Sebastian. Sebastian dodged the attack with ease. He was much bigger, and he wasn't a match. It was foolish of Connor to think he had a chance against the Wolf King. Sebastian revealed his large and sharp teeth, snapping them in Connor's direction, clamping around his neck, and pulling his throat through his fur. Connor screamed out in agony, but it didn't last long because he was soon dead. "Everybody needs to leave now," I cried to the crowd that remained at the doorway. They all looked hesitant, not wanting to miss the rest of the show, but there were so many that were injured, and staying would only cause the injuries to get worse. "Please," I pleaded to them. "You need to take care of your injuries and get to safety." My voice no longer sounded like my own as I pleaded with everyone to leave. They didn't waste any more time. They all turned and ran from the scene. I didn't realize Sebastian had shifted back. I turned to him, and he was still breathing heavily. I ran towards him as his eyes shifted from scarlet back to their normal blue. I tried to say, but my voice broke off into a sob as tears fell from my eyes. "Are you hurt?" he asked, staring around my body. I shook my head, trying to control myself. "No," I whispered. "What caused this?" "I don't know," he said as he looked around at the dead wolves around us. His eyes fell on a couple of the frat guys that were too stunned to move. "Maybe a revenge attack." "Revenge against the frat boys?" I asked. He turned away from the frat guys to face me, his expression hardening. "Why would you be here?" he asked. Do you have any idea how dangerous these parties are?" he scolded. I did now, I thought to myself, but I didn't say it out loud. I knew coming here was going to be a bad idea, but I didn't want to admit that out loud. "I'm sorry," was all I managed to say. He shook his head with disbelief as he wrapped his arms around me. He pulled me close to his chest, and I felt the warmth of his body soothing me. I breathed in his scent, and Nora relaxed, feeling at ease with his presence. "I'm so sorry," I whispered again. I still felt dizzy from the alcohol, and my adrenaline was going insane. But then I remembered Raya was still nowhere to be found. I pulled the part from him quickly, ignoring the obvious heat in my cheeks. "Raya is still in this house somewhere. I need to find her." His eyes darkened, and he nodded once. I grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the stairway. She had to have been upstairs. I wasn't sure how I knew what room to check first, but as soon as I touched the doorknob, I felt a sense that was too strong to ignore. Sebastian was behind me as I pushed the door open, and I gasped when I saw the bruised and beaten body of a woman in the bed. "Raya!"